years, there are many people around. There is filmwork is missing, and that's all. So we have nearly everybody. So I will start this event, which in my view, is important due to the very radical position adopted by the President of the United States on global warming, which he qualifies as a hoax, the fact that it should be of human origin. The problem is that he's taking this position when we have a major problem today. As you all know, I will improvise. The emissions of carbon in the world has been the highest since 800,000 years. 800,000 years. And the fight against climate change is more indispensable than ever. We must foster R&D areas and commitments to reverse the emissions of carbon, and evolution is extremely worrying. I must say that the environment for all those around the world that are committed to contribute to reverse this dramatic evolution for the future of mankind is not good at all. It was not good before Trump's return, but it is getting much, much worse with the arrival of the new president of the United States. He's not only campaigning against the fight against global warming, but worse, he's putting all his strength to force all involved in this battle, major challenge to reverse action. Big business, I give some titles extracted from the Financial Times. Big business is backtracking on climate goals when it comes to executives' top pay. Websites are purged of climate change statements, and everything is done in an astonishing way to avoid stopping the rise of temperature. No reason, nevertheless, to stop fighting. As far as we are concerned, we'll continue, and our friend in China, in America, everywhere, will go ahead to fight or contribute to this fight for the climate. And I am so glad in this respect that the International Finance Forum, which with the task force has been working so many times, has accepted to co-organize this event. And I'm so glad as well that Dawood Zayed, the president of the Institute for Governance and Sustainable Development, a good friend of the task force, is on board as well. Now, let me give them the floor for brief comments, welcome remarks. So, Xiangju, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. I'm very pleased to welcome you all here today in our virtual event of the fight against climate change in the new geopolitical environment. I would like to take this opportunity to extend our cordial thanks to the task force on carbon pricing in Europe, especially Mr. Edmond Alfondre for the organization of this event. We are also very grateful for the partnership with the Institute for Governance and Sustainable Development. As we convene here today, humanity confronts a looming cataclysm. Our society now faces its greatest test in human history. Runaway climate disruption from centuries of fossil fuel combustion has pushed the Earth's weather system to the brink of precipice, and with them us. Each day seems to bring new temperature records and ever more catastrophic weather events, such that those once categorized as once in a century and once in 1,000 years appear now as weekly or monthly phenomena. Paradoxically, these disasters accompanied by ever more denial of the overwhelming weight of the scientific evidence that devastating and irreversible shifts are underway in the world weather patterns. Anyone of a certain age, like myself, has already had occasion to witness firsthand the changes the Earth's climate has undergone in his or her own lifetime, changes which are daily becoming ever more conspicuous and devastating in their effects. Our planet has repeatedly suffered periods of overheating in ages past that were the consequences of either geological or astronomical forces, and which induced mass extinction. Each terrestrial life fortunately endured and ultimately recovered following these biotic crises, albeit in altered form. Just as our planet and its biosphere will survive the Anthropocene extinction, the first such mass event engendered by the single species in our planetary history. If it does indeed come to pass, our mission is to endure it doesn't. Now, hope for change, of course, seemed to have dawned a decade ago when delegates from all over the world came together in France in 2015 to negotiate the Paris Agreement that was signed the following year and which now boasts 195 signatories. Progress since then has lamentably been largely retrograde as the strident clamor of reactionary voices, some occupying the highest offices in the world, has drawn out the sense and the reason, sowing doubts in the science and duping the gullible. These naysayers who charge reputable scientists with fraud and denounce their incontrovertible findings as a hoax or scam, but without adducing any refuting evidence of their own, must never be allowed to dominate the debate, set the agenda, or take the wind out of our sails as we fare towards the safe haven of carbon neutrality. This additional and unnecessary obstacle will not dissuade us, but rather only further fortify our resolve. If we should fail in our task to overcome this existential threat, future generations engulfed by the ensuing cataclysm, indeed, is already upon us, will hold us to account for our dereliction of our duty to avert it. We must, therefore, remain steadfast and resolute, and neither falter in or veer from our course, as the ranks of climate deniers array themselves against us. We must never flag, never give up, never surrender, never cease striving for net zero, and above all, never abandon hope. The International Finance Forum, IFF, stands shoulder to shoulder with all our colleagues here today. United, we should together overcome all adversity to craft a green, ecologically remunerative, and equitable environment for humankind, one in which renewable energy is the primary driver of human progress, and in which the mistakes of the past are transformed into the boundless promises of the future. Thank you for all your participation. May success crown our present effort. Thank you.
Thank you, Xian. Thank you. Very, very encouraging thoughts. And thank you for this call for unity. Unity is key to fight global warming. All the world. This was the spirit of COP21, by the way, Paris COP21. Unfortunately, something happened which is breaking this unity. Okay, the last one is my good friend Durwood. But before, I salute many friends that have joined us. Philippe Jorgensen, who else? Pervenche. So, Graciela, my friend, Graciela Shishinaski is with us. Thank you, Graciela. I hope you will participate to the debate. Jean Jouzel is with us. Very nice. Thank you, Jean, to be with us. And many others. I saw Grégoire Postelvine. I'm sorry I cannot quote everyone, but all these people are very, very important in our debate. Now, I give the floor to Durwood. Durwood, you have the floor.
Thank you, Edmond, and it's a privilege to be here. I'll try to keep my remarks short. Time and tipping points. It is too hot. We have too little time, and tipping points that'll be irreversible and catastrophic are too close. We're at 1.5 degrees today. Scientists like Jim Hansen say that that goal is now in the rear view mirror. We are cruising along towards 3 degrees. Allianz, the insurance company, just warned its clients that 3 degrees is what they should expect in the future. That's an uninsurable future. That's a future with a big Minsky moment coming. And it's looking encouraging, however, that maybe Mark Carney will become the prime minister or will stay the prime minister of Canada. There are 28 self-amplifying feedbacks in the climate system that are causing warming to accelerate. They are not well characterized in models, so we have to be clear that the models are underestimating the risk we're facing. There are 16 irreversible tipping points scientists have identified. The first 6, according to Ripple et al., are just past 1.5. They include the collapse of permafrost, which is both a tipping point and a feedback mechanism that is self-amplifying, where the Earth starts to warm itself in addition to what humans had put in. So this is a very dangerous moment. And one of the most important metrics we should all focus on is the metric of speed, the need for speed to bend the warming curve down as quickly as possible. And when we look at that, we first logically turn to the CO2 side, which is historically about 55% of all warming. And we know we have to tame that as quickly as possible with clean energy, although we're not doing a very good job nicking the legacy so far. But when you look at how much avoided warming you can get from decarbonization, it is not very much in the near term. Because when you shut down fossil fuel facilities, you shut down not just CO2, but the co-emitted sulfates, which are cooling the planet. The sulfates fall out almost immediately in a matter of days, and they unmask existing warming. So decarbonization actually adds to warming for the first decade. And at the 2050 mark, only avoids a modest 0.1 degrees Celsius. Now, the good news is on the non-CO2 side, about 45% of warming historically when you look backwards. But the real direction we need to look is forward. And when you look forward, you see that cutting the non-CO2 super climate pollutants, and that's the HFC hydrofluorocarbon refrigerants, that's methane, that's tropospheric ozone and black carbon soot, along with N2O, you can get at least 4 times, maybe up to 6 times more avoided warming in 2050. This becomes the sprint that we can win while we're running the marathon on CO2. Maybe we think of it as the emergency brake. So the future is tough. The mountain we have to climb is a big, intimidating mountain, but it's encouraging to remember that we have climbed this mountain before when we attacked the stratospheric
methane. And I will organize, and you will all be invited, IFF and everybody, and you, Dawood, obviously, to another event of the task force. And you also, by the way, are there, early September, where we discuss where the progress on methane. We could do a lot with very few investments compared to what is needed for CO2 emissions abatement. Okay, now we start. And we will listen first. We have two introductory speakers. We are very, very honored to have Laurent Fabius, the father of the COP21. Everybody knows Laurent through this major event. And Lord Turner, the chairman of the Energy Transition Commission. So I give first the floor to Laurent Fabius, who has registered something for us. I think it is, Joanna, it's you which takes that in charge to give us, please, Joanna.
Yes, my team will play the video.
Okay.
Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, I'm very happy to be with you, though I am in Paris, to discuss about the question of climate warming in this new environment. I've been asked to set a sort of summary. I will set apart many important things, but within about 10 minutes, I will try to give you my insight of the situation. 10 years ago, we had the Paris Agreement, the famous COP21 that I was honored to prepare and to chair. And it is now the general background of any action against climate warming. You know the main elements of this document, which has been accepted by all the nations throughout the world, with 29 articles, 140 paragraphs of decisions, and the main elements that you know. The objective, carbon neutrality within the second half of this century, no more than 1.5 or 2 degrees for climate warming, the necessity for each nation to deliver what we call NDCs, nationally determined contribution, the global stocktake, and a lot of things which define the process the objective and the means in order to combat climate warming. Okay. If I go back to the Paris Agreement, the question is, how has it been possible? I put aside the excellency of French diplomacy, but more seriously, I use to summarize the fact that we had the conjunction of 3 planets. And it is because of this conjunction that we have been able to achieve this success. The first planet is the scientific planet. You may remember that at that time there were a lot of excellent works by IPCC, by IEA, and the more and more common admitted idea that science says that climate warming does exist, and that it can and it will result in a lot of catastrophe if we do not combat this climate warming. Therefore, there was a scientific positive community and a development of new technologies. The second planet is a civil society planet. I mean associations, NGOs, local authorities, companies, and the general public. And at that time, one could say, in 2015, that there was a greater awareness of the necessity to combat climate warming, and that civil society was supporting it. Obviously, the fossil fuel community, if I may say so, was not so pleased with that. But all in all, and at the end of the day, there was a great support of the civil society. The third planet is the government planet. Obviously, it was absolute necessity because you don't have any agreement in the COPs without the acceptance of every nation. And we were able, because of the climate, of the atmosphere at this moment, because of the acceptance of multilateralism, to get an agreement between the big ones, I mean China, US, India, Europe, but also the other ones. And everybody was gathering in the same direction, and at the end of the day, we had this famous Paris Agreement. What is the result? The result has been very good, and sometimes it is not quoted. In 2015, the trend was supposed to be an increase in the temperature of between 4 and 5 degrees. And today, the trend is 3 degrees. Okay. But, and there is an enormous but, 3 degrees is a problem, and an enormous problem. And therefore, if we compare this conjunction of planets with the present situation, where are we? We don't have the same conjunction. And the scientific planet, you've seen the attacks of President Trump against science, and science obviously is decisive for many reasons, and in particular because science gives data, and we need data to know if we are in the right direction or not. About the civil society planet, it's a mixed bag. You have undoubtedly a support in many sectors of the population throughout the world, but you have also a sort of backlash in some sectors of the population for different reasons. You have resistance of many actors of the fossil fuel industry, and you have the particular attacks, unjustified, of second President Trump, if I may say so, with decisions which are very harmful. Therefore, scientific planet is not so active, or it is menaced. The civil society planet also, there's a lot of problems, and mostly the government planet. You've seen the attacks against multilateralism, the tariff, and the fact that today it's very difficult to get an agreement between governments. It is the point where we are. And as a matter of fact, you've seen 2024 was the hottest year ever recorded. March, last month, in Europe was the highest temperature ever recorded. You have a lot of floods, of starvation, of enormous migration, and so on and so forth. And therefore, the situation is very difficult. And the question is, where do we go? The question is often raised to me, and probably like you. Are you optimistic, President Fabius? Are you pessimistic? No, it is not the question. Climate warming is a weapon of massive destruction, and we have to fight against this massive destruction. We know the answers. They have been excellently summarized, in particular by IEA, which published a few months ago a list of the necessary steps before 2030 in the domain particularly of energy. Reduce the use of fossil fuels, triple renewable energy capacity, double the pace of energy efficiency, cut methane emissions, scale up necessary financing, especially for emerging and developing countries. And all these elements are true today. Therefore, as a conclusion, I'm, like you, very often confronted with the question, are you optimistic or pessimistic? It is not the question. We have to act. On the negative side, we have a large emission gap. We have, unfortunately, a backlash among some actors. We have attacks against science and multilateralism. We have President Trump's justified actions. And we have, very importantly, financial uncertainty and worldwide instability. But fortunately enough, on the positive side, we have the development of technologies, which is often very impressive. We have a growing awareness that low-carbon energy is a key factor for security and independence. We have a large number of actors and nations which are hostile to President Trump's decisions, and we have the perspective of the COP30 in Belém, in Brazil, with an accent which will be put on ambition, finance, and you will discuss particularly about finance, and implementation. I've just been appointed as the president of the circle of the former COP's president, and I will make my best in order to accompany our Brazilian friends. And we have to keep that in mind. In this context, it is particularly important to maintain what I call the spirit of Paris. What is this spirit? Better, faster, and together. Better, faster, and together. And I think, and I know, that it is in this spirit that you in this task force will work. Thank you, and have a nice day.
Thank you very much. This is a very good introduction to what remains to do, which is design a roadmap. At the COP21, which was an event of exceptional importance, in fact, everything was, nothing was really compulsory. And that was the problem. And there was not a true roadmap. I would not criticize COP21. And I like very much what Laurent has said and what he has done in Paris, because it is the first time that all the countries in the world decided to fight together climate change. And so we have to acknowledge the tremendous progress made in Paris at that time. Nevertheless, today, what is missing is a roadmap, taking into account all the obstacles, political obstacles mainly, but also all the assets we have. And when I speak of assets, I look at our second speaker, who will introduce this discussion, Adair, because Adair is very optimistic through the evolution of the techniques and the progress that can be used to mitigate carbon emissions. Adair, you have the floor.
Thank you, Edmund. Thank you very much for organizing what is a very good opportunity for us to take stock of where we are in a new and very troubling global political environment. And I think we should be clear of how serious the situation is. The US administration has exited from the Paris process. It has rejected its national responsibility to reduce emissions, and it has cancelled any commitment to provide climate finance to help developing countries decarbonize. Clearly, this is a massive setback to efforts to reduce global emissions and limit climate change. And I fear it does mean that any chance of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees centigrade has disappeared, and that our challenge now is to cooperate in ways that make it at least possible to limit it to well below 2 degrees centigrade. Let's say that that means 1.7 or 1.8. So it is essential for countries still to work together to agree and take action to reduce emissions on a collaborative basis. And at the absolute core of what now has to happen, I think, is the relationship between China and Europe and the UK. For the purposes of the rest of my speech, whenever I say Europe, assume that I am talking both about the European Union and the UK, my dear little country, which despite its past mistakes is still a part of geographical and cultural Europe. In Europe, two stories are told about China and climate change. First, many people say that China is the leader in developing and deploying the clean technologies which will make it possible for the whole world to cut emissions while spreading prosperity for all. Second, it is said that China is by far the biggest emitter in the world, with per capita emissions now well above European levels, building coal plants at a rapid pace and not committed to reduce emissions before 2030. And I think the crucial thing to understand is that both of those stories are correct, and that in climate-related discussions between Europe and China, we have to have an honest recognition of both of those facts. And I would like to suggest for debate 4 implications of how China and Europe have to work together, which reflect the reality, those two big realities. First, on trade and investment flows. I think it is essential that Europe should welcome rather than fear the extraordinary global contribution that China has made in developing and reducing the cost of solar PV, batteries, wind turbines, electric vehicles, electrolyzers, and an increasing number of other technologies. And contrary to anti-Chinese myth, this leadership does not primarily reflect low environmental standards or low labor cost, which is increasingly irrelevant in highly automated factory processes. But instead, it reflects excellent science and technology and brilliant entrepreneurship by both state-owned and private companies in China. Now, of course, in response, Europe will want to develop its own domestic supply chains where possible, because Europe will want to have employment and value added in Europe. But I think it is absolutely vital that Europe does it in an intelligent fashion, working with China rather than against. The objective should absolutely not be 100% autarky, but something like what is set out in the Net Zero Industrial Act of maybe 50% of supply would be good to have from Europe, but 50% will still come from elsewhere, and that will primarily be China. Our aim should be to have significant domestic industrial bases where that is possible without significantly increasing the costs of the energy transition, but to do it in ways which is still benefiting from the extraordinary low costs in China. The approach should, I believe, differentiate between those sectors where Europe does have significant existing employment, such as automotive, where it would be concerning if we don't manage to create a significant future vibrant EV industry in Europe, and those where we do not have employment, such as solar PV, where, to be blunt, I can't see the disadvantage of us depending almost entirely on imports from China. I can't see that that is to our disadvantage, and I think it would be unbelievably expensive for Europe to have to subsidize its way to a solar PV manufacturing system. But above all, tariffs, I think, can play a role. I don't think you can exclude them, but wherever they are introduced, they should be set on the basis of factual analysis of current subsidies and in line with WTO rules, not simply plucked out of the air as they have been in the US. But above all, I think Europe in its development of an industrial supply chains should focus on location, not ownership, and should strongly welcome Chinese excellent clean tech companies to invest in Europe, bringing with them their innovative capabilities and their know-how. So that's point one. Second, however, I think China must recognize and respond to the fact that its per capita emissions are above those of responsible developed countries such as Europe, and will become even more so over the next 10 years. If you take China's commitment to peak emissions by 2030 and achieve net zero by 2060, and I accept Durwood's point that I'm focusing here on CO2, not the equally or even more important methane. But if you focus on CO2 and you say China at the moment has about 12 gigatons per annum, it says it will peak by 2030, assume that it's a straight line from here to 2030. It says it will get to zero by 2060, assume a straight line from 2030 to 2060. Then the cumulative emissions between now and 2060 would be 250 gigatons, which would be equal to the entire remaining global climate budget for any chance of limiting global warming to plus 1.5 degrees centigrade. If you do the same calculations for the UK, our legally binding carbon budgets in the UK imply cumulative UK emissions between now and our 2050 zero point of 4.5 gigatons. Now, of course, China's population is 22 times the UK's, but even if you multiply the UK's 4.5 by 22, you get to 100 gigatons versus China's 250 gigatons. Now, in Europe and in the UK, I and Laurent and Edmond and many other people on this call will continue to argue that we must reduce our emissions as fast as possible. And despite the current global turmoil, increased need for defense spend, rise of a radical right, even in Europe, which are climate deniers, despite all that, both the EU and the UK are still committed to achieving 90% emission reductions by 2040, and the UK is aiming for a zero carbon electricity system by the early 2030s. But I have to say to our Chinese friends, it will become increasingly impossible for us to maintain political support for that pace of reduction if China does not tighten further its emission reductions targets. As Europe's emissions fall, the argument which is put forward that whatever Europe does makes no difference to global climate change will gain more and more support. I will always argue against it, but we need China's help to win that argument. Third, We need to work together to drive emission reductions in the so-called hard to abate sectors of the economy, heavy industries such as steel, chemicals and cement, and long distance aviation and shipping, which together account for about 9 gigatons of CO2 emissions. In these sectors, international competition is an unavoidable factor. There are other sectors of the economy, such as road transport, building, heating and cooling, non-energy intensive industry, where it does not matter if different countries choose to decarbonize these different sectors at different rates from one another, as long as we all make commitments to reduce our overall emissions at a pace consistent with global temperature goals. We don't need those other sectors to move at the same pace across the world. But if Europe drives or attempts to drive decarbonization of its steel and cement companies via the imposition of a carbon price and other countries do not, let us be absolutely clear, Europe will not truly decarbonize its steel and chemical production. It will simply move that production to other countries which don't have carbon prices. Now, of course, we could do that and claim that as part of our 90% emissions reductions. That is allowed by the production-based accounting within the Paris process. But that would be a totally dishonest claim. And we should be aiming to reduce our emissions as they really are, including our imported emissions. And the only way to do that is for us to have a carbon price and others also have a carbon price. And if other countries do not also have carbon prices for these specific sectors of the economy, not for all sectors, but for these ones, Europe must and will combine a domestic carbon price with a border carbon adjustment, a CBAM. But the ideal response, which I plead with our Chinese colleagues, we must ideally achieve, is for China and ideally other countries to themselves impose an equivalent domestic carbon price. This would unleash in China the same outstanding innovation in these heavy industries, shipping and aviation, that we have seen in solar PV, wind turbines, batteries, and EVs. And it is absolutely essential that these Chinese emissions in these sectors fall at a pace compatible with global climate objectives, given the enormous share, over 50% in the case of both cement and steel, of all emissions from cement and steel across the world, which come from China. If other countries do not also progress, and if China did have a carbon price and still other countries didn't progress, we should be discussing with China a joint CBAM against all the other countries in the world which will not join that club. Fourth and finally, on climate finance, the US is pulling out of all forms of support for developing country climate finance, whether for mitigation or adaptation. We have to be clear about that. This isn't a partial drawback. They are going to do nothing for the developing world in climate finance. And this is tragic because it is just at the time when dramatic innovations and cost reductions, driven primarily by great Chinese companies, have made a set of crucial technology combinations, and in particular, the most important, I think, is solar plus batteries, now so cost effective as a route to clean electrification that they could drive a revolution of zero carbon electricity supply at low cost in low income countries across the world if we only had enough climate finance support. In this environment, the role of development banks, whether we are talking about the EBRD, the African Development Bank, Asia Development Bank, BRICS Bank, AIIB, and indeed national development banks such as the China Development Bank, the role of all of these is absolutely crucial. And I think Europe and China should be working very closely together and with other nations, for instance, at COP30 in Brazil, to work out how we really unleash the massive flow of finance required to support clean electrification across the developing world. Finance which, let us be clear and realistic, will create huge demand for Chinese technology, because it is China which has the technology at low enough cost to support that clean electrification. So those are my 4 proposals for how Europe and China should work together to maintain momentum in this incredibly worrying world, which the irresponsibility of the current US administration has created. And if we don't work together on this, the world is going to face even more harmful climate change than is already, sadly, unavoidable. Thank you.
Congratulations, Adair. Congratulations. I read your interview with us this afternoon. What you are saying, in my view, is probably one of the most important things for mankind, which is the fact that the 2 blocks, Europe and China, have to work together very closely on climate. And many, many countries will come. And it has to be through a significant price of carbon, the same, so that we can create a CBAM for the world. And we will drive most of the countries, and even the US, to come in. We will, if we have the enthusiasm, the will, we will change the fight against global warming. What you are doing is, what you are saying is probably one of the most important things to be said today, given the challenge ahead. And thank you very much. And with our friends, Chinese friends, the price of carbon in China can make marvelous things. Used, for example, I said that many times, for funding CCS on the coal plants, coal coming plants, which emit, as you know, more than 12% of total emissions of the world. So there is a lot of things, and I see Graciela, which will not be against that. I know her very well. So we can do many things together, and this is the reason why there is this event today with all of you, full of willingness to go ahead and to try to avoid this tragedy for our children, and grandchildren, which is above us, behind us. Okay, now we start part 1 on setting the stage for strengthening the global architecture of the fight against climate change, with presentation from US, China, and the EU. And the first to speak for the US, not the Trump administration. Dawood, you have the floor.
Thank you. And Edmond, I hope you'll send us a transcript. I couldn't keep up with the notes on Adair's presentation, but I want to study that. It's terrific. So please send that around if you can. Let me start with a couple more comments about the Montreal Protocol. The Montreal Protocol started under Maggie Thatcher and Ronald Reagan, and it's been
parce qu'elle a peur que ça nous tombe dessus.
It's been strengthened by every U.S. president, Republican and Democrat, since then, including in 2007, Bush led the effort to turn the Montreal Protocol from a treaty that did just ozone protection to one with climate as a side dish, to one that did climate explicitly. This is 2007. And then under the first administration of President Trump, which is very different than the current one, President Trump signed the American Innovation and Manufacturing Act to implement the Montreal Protocol. And then in the early days of Biden, 19 Republicans voted in the Senate to give their consent to ratify the Kigali Amendment in 2016 to take out the HFC hydrofluorocarbons, which will avoid up to 0.5 degrees Celsius of warming by the end of the century. So there is a good Republican pedigree. Again, this administration is very different than anything we've ever seen before, and I'm not as optimistic. The Montreal Protocol is worth studying in great detail because it's on track to avoid 2.5 degrees Celsius of warming by the end of the century. That's 1.7 degrees Celsius from reducing the fluorinated gases, and another 0.85 degrees by healing stratospheric ozone and preventing ultraviolet radiation from degrading forests and other sinks. So 2.5 degrees Celsius. Without the Montreal Protocol, we would have passed the tipping points and we would be in a different world today. So it's a treaty that we need to do everything we can to protect. And I'll mention also the energy efficiency side, because every time we've done a change in refrigerants as mandated by this treaty, we've gotten a bump in energy efficiency of cooling equipment, air conditioners, refrigerators, and so on. And this time we've made it a requirement, and the funding mechanism has recently put $100 million for developing countries to start doing more on energy efficiency of cooling equipment. It's worth noting that the majority of air conditioners in the world come from China, and China has a great responsibility to make them super efficient and not dump the inefficient and cheaper models in developing countries where they become energy vampires, sucking away energy needed for development. 50% of electricity energy in peak in the hot days is used for cooling, and that's going up and up and up. And I saw one of the one of the consulting firms, telling their clients a couple of weeks ago that in the 3-degree world that we're approaching, air conditioning is going to be a really good investment. All right. It's like, damn. So we have to tame that. Now let me switch from this brilliant sectoral agreement, the Montreal Protocol, to another one that we need. And we need one equally powerful for methane. So methane is now the single biggest and fastest way to turn down near-term warming. If we were to cut the anthropogenic emissions of methane by 45%, which we have all the technology that we need to do, we could avoid about 0.3 degrees Celsius by the 2040s. Big and fast. So how would we do that? Well, in the run-up to the Glasgow COP, the European Parliament said, why don't we develop a global methane agreement, a mandatory agreement? And we didn't move very far with that, but we did get at that COP the methane pledge, the global methane pledge, which now has 152 countries saying we should cut emissions of methane by 30% by 2030. And we also got later the European methane regulation. That becomes probably the most important climate policy in the world in the near term. It's progressively implemented from now to 2030, and it will, if we do it right, discipline the sellers, because it requires that the sellers meet a low methane intensity or pay a fee. So we need energy security. The gas will come in, will be bought, but there will be a fee attached to it. So it becomes, again, the fulcrum. Can we move beyond that and get Japan and Korea together with the EU? That's more than 50% of the natural gas market. Could they join in a buyer's club? 3 yeses would be all you'd need to have more than 50% of the market saying, you will have low methane intensity or you will pay a fee. That would be enough to discipline the sellers. And there's some further support that comes even in the United States. Now, when we have trouble at the federal level, as everyone has described, we move to the state level. So let's look at California, where I am today. There is a new bill introduced last month to require all the gas that's imported into California, which is 90% of the gas. They're the second biggest buyer of gas of all states in the U.S., has to meet a low methane intensity, or there will be a fee that will be set by the California Air Resources Board. Now, this is a bill, it's not law yet, but it has a very good chance of being enacted into law. At the same time, you have the U.S. Climate Alliance. That's all the blue states. And they have a robust program on the non-CO2, and they will continue at the state level. So New Mexico's always good. Colorado's always good. Michigan, Wisconsin, New York. So there's a tremendous amount of activity that will continue to help solve climate and innovate with new solutions, drive down prices, develop new markets, even as the federal government has stuck its head in the sand, or worse, I mean, has brought the meat axe to climate protection. So what else could be done? What else is being done? Well, data centers driven by the voracious demand for energy because of AI are going to end up buying more natural gas in the United States, for example. Their first commitment is to clean energy, but with the tariff war with Trump and China, the prices of renewables are going to go up in the U.S., at least during this war, and some of the demand will be met with natural gas. Two oil companies, Exxon and ConocoPhillips, have already announced they're building new natural gas plants specifically to service AI. So can we get the data centers, who are forward-looking, sensitive to consumer pressure, to commit to buying only low methane intensity gas? Can they become another one of the levers? And I think the answer is yes. I think they can. I think Google can. I think Microsoft can. And I think they will. So there are quite a few encouraging things going on still. And I think one day they will add up to enough to develop a global methane agreement that is mandatory, that starts with the oil and gas sector and coal bed methane, and then progresses to another protocol that would address the waste sector, and finally, and most politically sensitive, something to address agricultural methane, which has a lot of good activity right now with new investment. Bezos announced earlier this week with Global Methane Hub, I think an $80 million investment in enteric methane research. And so feed additives, selective breeding, there are good strategies on the way that may be able to solve, that will eventually be able to solve that side. So I remain optimistic. I do also think it's time to start paying attention to solar radiation management. All of our work on CO2, which is essential to win that marathon, all of our work on non-CO2 to win the sprint, is probably not going to be enough to keep the planet safe in the time we have left. And so starting to pay attention, study the possibility of using SRM, I think is something that we all need to look at. So thank you, Edmond. Look forward to the rest of the discussion.
Thank you, Dawood. We will come back to methane next September. Very important methane. Very important. Thank you for what you said. May I remind the speakers that you have 7 minutes each. We are very much out of time. So I give the floor immediately to Jing Wang. Jing, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Afdali, and thank you for the invitation from IFF to provide me this extraordinary opportunity to join you to discuss an important issue for climate change today. Yes, it's hard to discuss this very significant, but in particular, at this moment under the situation, global circumstances, to talk about how we coping with this issue. We are all discussing, I think government officials, scientists, entrepreneurs are asking the same question. I heard previous speakers also talk about, and even worrying, which direction are we heading towards? Well, this is really a complicated question, and to my opinion, climate change is just an example of, if you put it in a expand to a larger framework, and also you talk about the Montreal Protocol, etc. At the same year, 2015, when Paris Agreement is adopted, and the United Nations also adopted an agenda for sustainable development, 2030, with 17 sustainable development goals after Agenda 21, 1992. However, the implementation process has not been smooth, and the global environmental governance has been lower than expected. According to evaluation recently, as the 2030 deadline for achieving them looms, only a few targets, such as the mobile phone, broadband access, and internet use are in reach, while most will remain unmet. Okay, back to the subject of today, climate change. We have actually experienced very difficult journey since it was adopted 1992 in Rio de Janeiro, and then to Kyoto, and the Bali Island roadmap to Copenhagen, to Paris, to Glasgow, Dubai, and Baku last year. So after overcoming numerous difficulties, we have come this far today. But there is no reason to be pessimistic, I agree, although we have now arrived at this crisis moment. And we talk about climate change, we have different perspectives. If we from global perspective, we talk about mitigation, adaptation, finance, technology, capacity building. And, you know, scientists, you can debate, it is true or not. And entrepreneurs, of course, to talk about the cost for mitigation. Today, I'd like to summarize two my personal points. One is about the finance, because IFF is a very unique and influential, as far as I know, a very good platform. So I believe it has the advantage to discuss this matter. Firstly, I think, yes, developing countries are under great pressure to obtain funds needed to cope with this issue. And COP29 reached agreement that the amount is about $300 billion and 1.3 trillion investment. Although it is per year, it is not enough, but it is outcome of very hard negotiations. In fact, according to USFCCC Standing Committee on Finance, developing countries need nearly $6 trillion to implement this climate action. Secondly, international financial reform is urgently needed according to UN Secretary General, he stated at last September at the Summit of the Future that international financial architecture is outdated and ineffective and not equipped to take on the wide range of emerging issues. So I agree with that, and I think we need to urge that this reform to support and speed up the investment and the projects aiming for realization of SDGs, and also mobilize private funds to environmentally friendly projects. The situation right now is unfortunately that not only has been no progress, but it has also regressed. For example, what we see recently is that many banks, famous banks, withdraw from called Net Zero Banking Alliance, which was at the time a model mechanism of financial support for climate change. I think this phenomenon deserves great attention. In addition to funding issue, another important issue is technology innovation. Firstly, we need enhancing R&D for technology. Our response to climate change depends on these, but the current technology is inadequate. I think some, not all of them, but it is a problem to ensure to achieve carbon neutrality by middle of the century, which Paris Agreement said. The fact are that many countries are engaged in this kind of technology development, such as hydrogen, energy storage, etc. But this technology is immature and the cost remains high. Meanwhile, the safety is also, not yet completely resolved. New technology needs to be developed. Secondly, we should strengthen international cooperation on this matter, technology. China has done a lot of work on this since China launched, we call it Zero Carbon 3060 target in 2020. Under 1+N policy framework, the Ministry of Science and Technology, which I have been serving with for many years, has organized a task force to formulate China carbon neutrality technology roadmap. We are very much willing to conduct cooperations on this technology development with friends around the world from various countries. I would like to take this opportunity to emphasize here that technology for addressing climate change is not a competitive technology, let alone a so-called sensitive technology. Very often scholars have always talked about economic law theories and climate change technology as economic terms of it is a public good. It can serve, it provides service for all the countries and humanity. So each country has the responsibility and obligations, in particular, technologically advanced countries, to promote cooperation and jointly respond. In conclusion, it will be easier for all of us to deal with climate change only when both finance and technology issues are solved. Okay, I stop here today and I hope to have a chance to talk to you later on. Thank you again.
Thank you, Jing. Thank you for this very interesting aspect, which is important. Now I give the floor to Domenico Siniscalco. Domenico, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Edmond. Can you hear me?
Very well.
Okay. Well, this conference, and I thank you very much for the invitation, falls at a very important moment because Donald Trump led the US administration to exit the Paris process. And I believe this is really a short-sighted and catastrophic view. Furthermore, today, due to tariffs, everything seems to be stopped, but that, in my opinion, will be solved, while climate is much more subtle as a topic because it didn't inject a market reaction, and therefore is unclear to me how and if it will be corrected. So I'll elaborate on this topic by 7 easy topics, pieces we can discuss. First, the spirit of the time, the zeitgeist, as the Germans say. There is no doubt the spirit of the time has changed. In the US, as Adler was saying, the Alliance for Climate by banks, funds, etc., has been stopped. In Europe, it didn't arrive yet, this wave, but there is no doubt that these things are global opinion processes, and it will become pretty soon. Suffice it to see what's going on in automotive regulation. Here we are not talking about relaxing the current standards, but we are discussing about extending the time, prolonging the process or the time span which is given to automotive makers. And that, of course, not only creates a problem per se, but also injects uncertainty. And as you know, uncertainty is as bad as the regulation per se in injecting a halt or a slowdown of the incentive. Same thing happens in Green Deal, in CBAM, in whatever regulation, because it's actually the spirit of the time, thanks to the US, which is So, hello? Yeah.
Could you stop?
No, it's fine. So attention, the issue is between stone and hard rock. The problem is as severe as it used to be last year, but the policy response is much slower and it's much worse than it used to be last year. So we are navigating between the stone and hard rock. And I believe we should try to move among these two pillars. As Adler was saying, technology will come to help. Technological process is proceeding anyway, but you see, the problem is investment. So the issue here is how to keep the sensitivity alive, how to keep people attention alive at the legislative viewpoint and the public opinion viewpoint, which means press, schools, even dissemination of all possible media to keep the problem alive. Because you see, the problem is that we cannot address this issue at the national level, particularly in Europe. Europe is an integrated market, so it doesn't make any sense that Italian or French or German car market or any other market moves in a direction or the other. We have to move all together, but moving all together is complex. So this is the problem. We need at least a cross-regional, if not global, approach. And the problem is that grand global coalition are very difficult to build in this area and in every other environmental area. It's a sort of walk in the desert, but if we don't move fast, the desert will be here pretty soon. The answer is the 5 points other said. The problem is not the problems per se, but how to reach an agreement on this matter. But I believe that all in all, sensitivity on environmental issues is not has not stopped, and therefore we should push as much as possible in the right direction. Edmond, I stop here.
Thank you, Domenico, for these very thoughtful remarks viewed from Europe. Now we we are out of time. We should skip immediately to the part 2, but well, I think that it is necessary to give the floor to all these people, bright people that have accepted to join us. So let us spend at least no more than 10 minutes of interventions. But please be brief. Be brief. No more than 1 minute each intervention, so that there are a lot. Okay, who wants to take the floor on what has been said? Nobody?
Edmond, can I speak? It's Pervenche.
Please.
Thank you. I think that was really fascinating. I have a big question because I think the roadmap that Edmond, you said we have no roadmap coming from the COP, and I think what Eder Turner said is exactly a roadmap. I think if you look at the part of trade, the US global part is not the biggest one, so we still have 85% trade. And the basis for cooperation between China and the EU, I think, is the way forward. But I think it will not be enough to discuss climate environment question, because we need to bridge with reform of the international monetary system. It's been mentioned, and trade. So it's a big question, where and how to have this debate between environment, climate, trade, and finance. Because it cannot be only the COP.
Yeah, you enlarge the subject. You enlarge the subject very much. Yeah, that this can be. Okay, who wants to speak? Who wants to answer? Adair, you want to take this question? No. Philippe?
I want to hear what everybody else has to say.
Well, perhaps a very simple thing. It's Philippe Varin, ICC chair. I think it's really a G20 question or G20 question. If there is no political support at this level, it will be very difficult to achieve our roadmap from Baku to Belém. As I mentioned, especially the financing matters.
Okay, Christophe.
Actually, can I say one thing?
Yeah, please.
I mean, this may be controversial, but I think we've got to face reality now. I mean, the stuff which was agreed at Baku is just fantasy land. It was fantasy land when it was agreed, because what happens is people agree, there's a 300 billion figure and there's a 1.3 trillion figure. And as written in the Baku final communique, it was almost impossible to work out what was the difference between the two, because, if there wasn't a clear division between what was concessional finance, what was grant finance, what was private, what was public. The words in relation to both sets of the 300 and the 1.3 were pretty much the same. And we've gone through a period of time where at these debates on finance, everything's about a communique, and then everybody goes out afterwards and isn't agreed on what it says. In the aftermath of the US basically being completely unwilling to provide any category of finance, there is not going to be a big up in European concessional and grant finance, because that has to come out of fiscal budgets, and it's just not going to be there. So that's why my comments focused on the thing that we've absolutely got to supercharge is the development bank flows, which are not typically concessional or a grant, but they are at lower interest than the private flows would be. We've had a whole load of reports over the years, you know, the Larry Summers, N.K. Singh report, the Vera Songway, Nick Stern report. We know what the agenda is, and we've got to turbocharge that agenda. And I hope that at COP 30 in Brazil, the discussion is about how to achieve that, rather than another of these sort of game processes where everybody debates about a figure going into a communique, but the figure doesn't mean anything, because I don't think the Baku figures meant anything.
Okay. Christoph Balz.
Yes, thank you very much. And I have one question to Durwood and his methane ideal to move forward rapidly there. We see at the moment a great pressure from Trump on the EU to import lots of LNG gas. On the one hand side, we only need a certain amount of LNG gas in the EU. That's one point, but wouldn't it be at the moment intelligent to say from the EU, we only buy LNG gas if it is linked to a strong methane regulation, that we combine this?
With the disadvantage that US natural gas is high methane emissions. That's the fact. So we're just going to be in a rock and a hard place with US political pressure. But Christoph, I absolutely agree with you. I think we should have very strong, you know, standards for methane emissions into the UK, into Europe.
Yeah, interesting. Grégoire Postel-Vinet.
Thank you, Edmond. It's more comments than questions. First, the climate change adaptation and mitigation must be addressed simultaneously if we want to avoid the backlash in public opinions. And we should look for synergies between the two, which is particularly useful for planification in infrastructures, because there are huge amounts of infrastructure, so it will be required by the adaptation. The second, I agree with what has been said with methane importance. The third is concerning the US as an elephant in the lobby. I think we should cope with sub-federal levels, because that is important too if we want to have an impact on opinions. And well, technology efforts will go on indeed. It should include nuclear energy research, especially for the fast neutron reactors, because that will be useful in the future, especially after 2050. But we should think of it immediately.
Thank you. Not other intervention. I will add something which is, I think, at least to my mind, important. When it comes to this huge and major issue, which is how to fund the clean energy sector in the third world, in the emerging countries, where to find the money. My guess, international banks and so on, why not? But the amount is so huge. I think that the natural origin of the funding should come from carbon pricing. Carbon pricing in industrial countries, because we have been responsible for most of the carbon in the atmosphere, and I think that it is normal that we take care of the energy sectors of the emerging countries, which have huge needs of energy. And without this funding, I don't see how they could fund a clean energy sector. It is so easy to go to carbon, to coal, excuse me, to coal or fuel, but coal mainly. Coal is the cheapest. So that, in my view, should be to answer Pervenche, one of the key dimensions of the roadmap, global roadmap in the world. Okay, we go to part two now, and it is on the focus on some aspects of the fight against global warming, a debate with members of task force on carbon pricing in Europe. So those who will speak, except one, are members of the task force, and we have already had a discussion between us. And the first speaker is Philippe Varin. Philippe.
Yeah, thank you, Edmond. So I think we are all here very conscious of the downside risk posed by the withdrawal of the United States from the Paris Agreement. So in our view, it is really essential. An essential element to mitigation for this risk is to reassure that developing economies that the UN climate process can deliver for them in real and practical terms. And nowhere is it more important than in the area of financing, as we have just said. So I make a very quick review of what is at stake here, but we have already addressed the points, and perhaps focus on three issues. One is Basel III. The second is MDBs, multi-development banks, multilateral development banks, and voluntary carbon markets. So if you look at the last decade, it has been arguably been characterized by a string of broken promises, as we have just said, and missed deadlines. We are also acutely aware that enhanced access to finance will be critical to developing economies and to develop confidence to submit far more ambitious climate actions plans and NDCs for this year. Not least given the scale of investment needs in clean energy infrastructure alone. So, which according to the IEA, as we have just said, will need to increase sixfold by 2035 from the 230 billion in 2023 to 1.3 to 2 trillion US dollars. So in this context, we place some importance on the Baku to Belém roadmap that was agreed at COP29 last year, but vital that government recognize the central and indispensable role of the private sector in delivering on that agenda. Of the $1.3 trillion pledged in Baku, well, we estimate that around 70% of the total will need to be mobilized by private sources. And of course, that figure proportion may yet increase as governments step back, as we have said, from overseas development assistance commitments. So in this context, we are focused on three specific areas that could be delivered through the Baku to Belém roadmap and associated actions by governments, multilateral institutions, and private sector. So the first one is related to Basel III. We believe that there needs to be a fundamental reflection of the impact of post-crisis financial regulation on the flow of private climate finance to emerging markets. At the macro level, our initial analysis of data from the Bank for International Settlements shows a very clear correlation between the entry into force of Basel III, which was around 2010, sorry, and a steep decline in flows of bank finance from advanced to developing economies. We know anecdotally that there are clear reasons for that. Inter alia, one is higher capital charges for emerging market exposures as a result of sovereign weightings being hardwired into the Basel III framework. Two, no recognitions of MDB guarantees in calculation of capital requirements. Three, higher capital charge for long-term investment for infrastructure and major projects. And four, no positive incentive for climate-related assets. we will be realizing a new academic study in late May, and it will outline the impact of Basel III on climate finance flows. There's a basis for a concerted advocacy push to secure either could be a commitment from the G20 and in the Baku-Belém roadmap to revise the application of Basel to climate finance flows, or failing that, independence commitments from key regulators or central banks to introduce some measures within their respective jurisdictions to reduce the capital weighting applied to qualifying investments, which means in clean energy projects. The second point is that we need to reimagine the role of multilateral development institutions. Here we are, well, we welcome the discussion that's been ongoing for several years around increasing the support provided by the World Bank Group and other major MDBs. But we think it is important to add some nuance to this debate. Development bank finance for clean energy today only generates 1.3 multiple in private investments. So when the World Bank put $1 on the table, private sector comes from with 1.3. This is simply too low. That's why we think we need much greater focus from development institutions on equity investments that could catalyze private investments, as well as potentially early stage grants, for instance. In short, we need development banks to move from being guarantors or quasi-market participants to genuine catalysts of private climate finance. You know, Ajay Banga, the chair of World Bank, was previously in my chair 2 years ago. So if I were younger, I would have a bright future. But he's really supporting us because he thinks that the leverage of World Bank investment could be much higher. The third piece is about voluntary carbon markets. We welcome the progress on Article 6 of the Paris Agreement at COP29. There is a great potential to boost finance for decarbonization projects here, and particularly those like in mitigation that would not occur without the availability of credits. We had a research by a consulting company, Bain, that suggests that a high integrity voluntary carbon market could remove 2.6 gigatons of emissions by 2030, nearly 12% of the reduction we need by 2030 to stay on the course of the 1.5 degrees. That implies an increase in market value from $1.1 billion last year to circa 1.1 to 30 billion by the end of the decade. So we still see too much uncertainty in the market. Companies are concerned about the PR risk. If they are accused in the media of purchasing low quality or hot air credits, for instance. Widespread uncertainty still about credits can be reliably counted towards net zero targets. So in this context, it's probably not surprising that our analysis of markets data suggests that issuance of new credits declined over the first 3 months of this year, putting the market on track to enter an era of negative net issuances for the first time, where the number of credits issued is less than those which are retired from the market. So we are working with a range of key players, in particular the World Bank and also VCMI, to look at practical interventions to boost business confidence in and demand for the voluntary carbon markets, such as through enhanced guidance on the acceptable use of credits, potentially even the creation of a recognized so-called safe harbor protection, where corporates have purchased offsets in good faith. So we are here exploring potential avenues to boost confidence and certainty in these voluntary carbon markets, such as on our side, we can standardize contracting terms and bespoke dispute resolution platforms with the ICC Court of Arbitration. So in this endeavor, is it for financing MDBs or Basel III matters or voluntary carbon markets? We are willing to set up, and we are working on it, say a coalition of the willing in this roadmap from Baku to Berlin. And if you are interested in any of these 3 work streams, please reach out to me directly. Edmond is my email address, or Andrew Wilson, who is deputy here, Secretary General, is on the call. And really, we would welcome any discussion and support from your side. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Philippe. Philippe, your speech is all the more important given that the International Chamber of Commerce represents firms all around the world, all around the world. That is very important. And this is what we need to fight climate change efficiently. We need unity. And you are representative of unity of the firms, and I am among those. And I think that many of you share this view of those that think that firms are at the heart of the fight against climate change. If we can mobilize them, create the right incentives to the firms, we'll win. It will go from the firms, not households. I've been a politician during 30 years. I know what I mean. The households, they have no power. They go through elected people. So it's very complicated but the firms are extremely, extremely important in the fight against global warming and the ICC as well. Okay, now I give the floor to Duang Maoshang. Maoshang is very accustomed to be with us. I salute him and I give him the floor.
Yeah, thank you, Edmond. Thank you for the invitation. So I was asked to talk about the role of ETS in China to achieve our mitigation targets. You know, we have the carbon peaking and carbon neutrality target, and we have a comprehensive policy framework. We call it 1+N. 1 means the top level roadmap, and N means the policies for different sectors or different industries. So, I mean, when we talk about the policy framework, you will notice that while the ETS or carbon pricing policy is only one of the many, many policies China are utilizing to achieve our mitigation target. So that basically means when we talk about the China's mitigation efforts, you cannot simply assess the ambition by looking at the price or in the carbon market. I think that's the first point. And even when we talk about the market-based instrument, we do not only have ETS or even the voluntary carbon market. We also have other market-based instruments. For example, in China now, the authorities pay a lot of attention to the trade of green certificates. I mean, it is an incentive to decarbonize the power sector. And in China, I think one of the feature we are usually always talking about in the Chinese policy framework is that, well, we have a lot of policy in parallel. In the past, we have the mitigation control policies, and also we have the energy conservation policies. I mean, they are interacting with each other, sometimes contradicting with each other. But fortunately, last July last year, the central government issued a document that we are transitioning from the dual energy conservation policy to the dual carbon control policy. So basically, from now on, we will mainly focusing on carbon mitigation rather than at the same time energy conservation. And if you look at the policy issued by the Chinese central government, basically the mitigation efforts are focusing at 5 different levels. For example, the regional level, the sectoral or industrial level, the company level, the project level, and the product level. And you will notice that, well, in some of the efforts, I mean, the ETS plays a very important role. For example, data. When we allocate or establish mitigation targets for the regions, or for the sectors, I mean, we must rely on the unreliable data. So where will the data come from? Well, in the document, it is noted, it is spelled out that the current market, the ETS, will be one of the sources for the data. That is one. The second one is that there is a connection between the targets, mitigation target for the regions, and how the national emission trading system will be established. For example, it is said that if according to the projection, there is a risk that the target will not be achieved. So the efforts will be made to strengthen the ETS cap. I think they are trying to establish a direct linkage between the assessment of the mitigation outcome and the design of the ETS. Well, China's national ETS started operation in 2021, and now we are in the fourth compliance period. And before 2023, China's national emission trading system covered only one sector, the power sector. Well, although the covered amount of emissions is quite huge, it's about 5 billion tons of CO2. But I mean, it's only one sector. But last month, the authority just issued a document. We are now expanding our national ETS to 3 new sectors: the iron and steel sector, the aluminum sector, and also the cement sector. And the annual covered emissions will increase from 5 billion to 8 billion. So basically, it will cover quite, I think, about 70% of China's total emissions. And also in the past, we covered only CO2. But after the expansion to the 3 new sectors, we are covering other 2 types of greenhouse gases. That is the latest development. But while in the development of China's national emission trading system, there are a lot of, I think, debate even within the authorities. For example, some, especially for example, the economic authority, or they think they are very concerned the expansion of the carbon market to other sectors, or strengthen of the emissions cap of the system, will have very negative impacts on the development of those carbon sectors for the whole country's economy. I mean, we know this is a very important issue, right? We are now having some trade war or tariff war. I mean, so I mean, this is a very important issue, and I think it's not very easy to get consensus among different authorities. But luckily, I mean, there was an agreement among different authorities to expand the ETS to 3 new sectors. But if you look at the document issued last month, you will notice that at the very beginning, the design, all the design of the national emission trading system will be loose, or the cap will be very generous. So basically, even for the first year, so basically the system will not ask the covered new sectors to reduce their emissions. So basically, they will be given allocated allowances equal to their emissions. So I think the purpose just to familiarize those sectors or those covered enterprises with the market rules. And I mean, I think that is the main purpose of the first phase. And I mean, then from the second year on, they will be utilizing a benchmarking approach to allocate free allowances for the newly covered sectors or enterprises. That is the mandatory carbon market, the emission trading system. In addition to that, we also have our voluntary emissions, voluntary carbon market, so basically to encourage emissions or mitigation efforts of the non-covered sectors. And while the Chinese authority have issued 6 methodologies, mainly for the renewable energy sector, and also the main the co-methane sector. And now they are in the phase of developing some new methodologies, but there are still some debate on which technology should be supported by the voluntary emission reduction system. For example, we know that CCS, CCUS technologies are very important. Still, there are some disagreement around. I mean, maybe some experts, some authorities, people are of the view that, well, if we have that amount of financial resources, why don't we support other technologies? I mean, there are many debates on which technology we should support through the voluntary carbon market, and that is how the Chinese national carbon market, both the emission trading system and the voluntary carbon market, looks like at the current stage. Another issue related to China's carbon market is that, well, we know under the Kyoto Protocol, China has benefited a lot from the CDM, right? Not only financially, but also in terms of helping us to improve our capacity. But now I think things have changed a lot. Under the Kyoto Protocol, China is one of the major sellers of mitigation credits. But now we are facing a lot of difficulties in achieving our over mitigation target. I know a lot of colleagues are saying, oh, that China's mitigation targets are not ambitious enough. But according to our current assessment, I think even for the 2030 mitigation target, it will be very difficult for China to achieve that. I mean, when I say very difficult, I'm not referring to the carbon peaking. I'm referring to the at least 65% intensity reduction target. It will be very difficult for China to achieve that target. So in this sense, China is now seeking to assessing the possibility of using mitigation credits from other countries to help us to achieve our mitigation targets. So you can see that, well, in the future, maybe China will not be the net seller or in the international carbon market. Maybe we are going to buy credits, mitigation credits from other countries. Basically, you will say a lot of development in China national carbon market, a lot of difficulties in this process, and also where actually our post or will be changed in the future. I think I will stop here. Thank you, Edmond.
Thank you, Marshall. Very interesting. You are an expert on the carbon market in China. I think that we have a lot of hope in the development of the carbon market in China. I think that you could do very, very, very important things, not only for China, but for the world. And thank you very much for your speech, which is very constructive. Now I give the floor to Nicolas Piot. Nicolas.
Yes, thank you, Edmond. And if you're right, I would just like to share, I have just 4 slides to support my presentation. And just to be clear, I come from the energy world. I come from the investment world, and I'm now investing in scaling up energy transition technologies. So I think I don't need to be convinced of the need for these investments. I share a lot of what has been said, even though I think we could have an interesting discussion on the issues of security of supply. But I think I would also like to share a concern as an investor on a reality and a subterranean, I would say, trend that I see, which is linked to social cohesion. And I do see increasingly the issue of rising social inequalities and social matters becoming a hurdle to the fight against climate change. And so what I would like to show here is just energy poverty is a reality in the richest economies. So left is Europe, right is the US. Not going to enter into the details, but just to say in Europe, you have roughly between 10 to 20%, depends on countries, of energy poverty, and this is increasing. In the US, the trend is very clear. In the lower end of the income distribution, energy burden is increasing dramatically. And I think we need to take this to account because, you know, around the world, there has been some showcasing of yellow vests and as the social unrest in France. I think it's just a symptom. It's a symptom of a wider trend in the richest economies, that if energy transition comes at a cost on the most vulnerable population, we will see a backlash. And this is internal. We'll discuss after. I totally agree with you on, Edmond, when you talked about the funding by the most advanced economies for the poorest economies. I think this is a matter of ethics, and I think this is a matter of meeting the goals of climate change. Maybe a quick focus on the US. This is taken from an article of just a month ago from the FT. On the left-hand side, I just took the amount of public transfer, government transfer as percentage of personal income in the US in 97, basically in the Kyoto Protocol. And the right-hand chart is, of course, the same thing in 2022. And this shows how growing inequalities is becoming a pattern of the fight against climate change. When you superpose that with Republican voting counties, you see that the places where you have the biggest rise in government transfers are actually the one who are fighting the hardest against climate change, whereas these are the people who are the most vulnerable to it. And I think this is also a very fertile context for demagoguery. Now, you could translate it differently if we take a step back and we look at investment and we look basically at asset and capital allocation. I think climate change is said to be the biggest capital reallocator that we have seen in history. There has been a study, so this is a study from Nature Climate Change. They're talking about 1.4 trillion stranded assets across the globe. If you look at it, it's mostly oil and gas. What is, I think, striking is in the top 10 countries, you have a lot of rich economies. This is a 2022 study. The reality now is there is an SEC report that mentioned 11 trillion in the US alone of assets at risk. So it wasn't really stranded assets, it was assets at risk. And there are a number of studies today that talk in the tens of trillion of assets at risk because of climate change. And I think this is super important because in the behavior against that fight that we are seeing, the backlash on climate change, we need to understand that there are people who can lose massively in this sort of transition that we are trying to promote. And the first people who are going to be losing are the poorest. And I think here, Caceres will not disagree. We know that public goods and public capital is the one that is mostly used by the poorest, and they don't have the means to replace that with private capital. So when we deteriorate public capital and public goods, we are disproportionately impacting the most vulnerable in the population. And I think this is also one element of the backlash. But what we're seeing here also is that the wealthier, the people who own the private capital, have a lot to lose if we fight against climate change. Then, of course, there is the investment trend. And the investment trend is actually opening massive opportunities, and we should seize those opportunities. But the question, how do we seize them? And today, the trend that we are increasingly seeing, typically in the US, is that the benefits of investing in energy transition or a climate transition has been disproportionately oriented towards the wealthier and a very, very small number of people. One way to represent that is how public versus private capital over GDP has evolved. Actually, what it means is that public investment in this area has been there's been an underinvestment, meaning that the public assets have a lower value than the debt that the public has overall. Whereas private assets have seen their value increase massively in terms of percentage of GDP. And so I think here there's a message that I would like to pass on as an investor. I am worried, and we are increasingly worried as some private capital investors, that if the social conditions aren't there, we are going to see massive shifts in investment patterns. We are going to see increasing risk patterns and people avoiding to invest in necessary technologies because the fundamental trends won't be there. There won't be an adoption for electric vehicle if the costs don't go down and people see electric vehicle as only elite and premium vehicles. Same thing would apply for a number of the other technologies, hydrogen, etc., although it's probably more a B2B effort than a B2C effort. But there are a number of trends like this that we think are fundamental to the fight against climate change. I'm going to stop there here, but I think if we confiscate the benefits of the fight against climate change for a small portion of the global population, we will see the effective fight against the climate change be a chimera and be actually subject to major backlash. And I'm going to stop there.
Thank you, Nicolas. Thank you. You point out a major issue in the fight against climate change. It is that we need to have everyone on board. And obviously, the impact is different according to the wealth and the progress, so the geography and the countries and so on. And this is a very big problem. And when I was speaking about the roadmap, it is because for the time being, we don't have any roadmap to look at this kind of global issue, which is key. Because if there is a very big refusal of a significant part of the population of the world, which is more the case today than yesterday due to Trump. That's obvious. Then it becomes very complicated. Okay, thank you, Nicolas. Very good slides. Now I give the floor, last but not least, to Gilles Mouek from AXA. AXA is a sponsor of the task force. Gilles, whom I've known for years. Gilles, you have the floor.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Edmond. It's good to see you again, and I'm really happy to be in this distinguished assembly. So I can give you a sort of experience of someone who's been involved in investment in responsible investment in the last few years as part of our effort at AXA. Even if I'm an economist, so it probably still colors my views, but I would start with a very simple point on the nature of insurance. We tend to think systematically in assets and liabilities. On the asset side, how we treat our accumulated assets, our accumulated wealth. On the liability side, how we actually underwrite risk and how we do provide insurance. And obviously, those two elements resonate with the fight against climate change. So on the first one, just to give you a sense of what we're trying to achieve and the kind of difficulties that we are facing right now on the investment side. Our target is to reduce the carbon intensity of our main account by 30% by reference to 2019 by 2030. But the problem at this stage is that we have data, we have comparable consensus views and information on a fairly small fraction of the portfolio, because as much as on corporate debt and listed equity, we have now enough info, there are enough data providers, And there is enough of a convergence of approaches and methodologies on the market for us to be confident in what we do and in what we present down the road to our clients. It is not yet the case for key asset classes. And I would think, for instance, about private assets in general, for which there is not, for now, enough data, enough information, enough consensus. And an even more complicated issue, because it's quite a significant chunk of any insurer's balance sheet, it's government bonds. For the time being, there is no accepted consensual view on how you should treat the carbon intensity of a sovereign bond. And in quite a few cases, it's 1/3 or even 1/2 of whatever you would find on an insurer's balance sheet. So on this, there is still progress to make. And with progress come issues. And the purpose of your meeting today is to link decarbonization to the geopolitical context, and we are facing difficulties there. Let's be honest. Europe continues to go forward, and even if there's a simplification effort now in the pipeline on reporting by the corporate sector, which we support, even if it is being simplified, there will still be an improvement in the quantity of data that we will have in Europe. This is absolutely not the case in other constituencies, and in the US, actually, it's even going the other way around in terms of the mass of data, the mass of information we can get. It goes further than that, because on the asset management side of things, for instance, we are today de facto unable to offer our services to pension funds linked to states in roughly half of the United States. We just can't, because the very fact of simply having any sort of oil and gas strategy, for instance, is enough to get you banned. And this is getting increasingly problematic, obviously, in terms of expanding the business. And it all dovetails with an issue which had been absent, actually, I think, for quite a number of years. It's the issue of performance. There was a sort of received wisdom in the market that probably decarbonizing the portfolio would provide you with a better performance than the average, because on trend, decarbonized companies tend to be better, very simply better managed, for instance, than browner ones. This has changed. This has changed because of what happened with the increase in oil prices 2-3 years ago. If you run decarbonized portfolios and oil prices go up, by definition, you are going to underperform benchmark, and that is going to be an issue down the road with your clients. And also because, and again, in the US, we are facing a very restrictive approach to fiduciary duty. And to the point that was made by Nicolas, when we think about fiduciary duty as an insurer, we think of providing a decent financial return, including the possibility that an asset might be stranded in the future. So internalizing the need to mitigate climate change has obviously an impact on the long-term value that we ascribe to an asset. But if you're faced with a legal framework, and it is currently the legal framework in the US that tells you, no, you cannot take into account this sort of issues. Your fiduciary duty is super restricted to purely non-dynamic but static financial indicators, then you run into trouble, because it gets incredibly difficult to simply do business in those areas. And I would finish very quickly. I don't want to take too much time. I have 7 minutes, so I have one left. On the proper underwriting side of things. And what we're trying to do here is to engage with the clients to participate to the reduction in the carbon intensity of our underwriting, of our insurance policies. And we can help. We've developed actually a number of tools. For instance, focus now is on repairing what can be repaired instead of running directly to changing actually, for instance, cars when they get wrecked. But there is actually massive resistance and psychological resistance to this sort of things. So there's still a need for education on this matter, even if we think that we're going to solve this. One very final word, because the task force obviously operates a lot on the issue of carbon pricing. For me, it's key from a purely business point of view and from a performance point of view. Because if we can very simply ascribe a price to carbon emissions of most investment proposals in the world, we can convince super traditional investors, even those who don't actually believe in the need to mitigate climate change, simply to re-inject this as a key building block into any normal financial assessment of any investment proposal. So carbon pricing for me is absolutely key. Europe has definitely moved on this. We can see experiments in China. We've seen experiments in some US states. That needs to get much broader, because again, that is one way to kill this curse of performance and this curse of fiduciary duty. I stop here.
Wonderful, Gilles. We will speak together about that, because I'm writing a book. I tried to write a book on that. I've been trying for years and years, but I have no time. It's my problem. But you are raising something which is extremely important. Extremely important, because I think that you probably make a tremendous progress if there is an agreement on the price of carbon. Even it is not a market price of carbon, it can become a market price for carbon, which is even better. But it could be a tremendous progress if we had a price of carbon which could be adopted globally for investment, for example. For investment, Total Energy, another sponsor, by the way, of this group, of the task force. I often speak with the CEO of Pouyanné of Total Energy, and he says, when we invest, we take into account the price of carbon of 100 euros per ton at 2030. We introduce in the calculus this price of carbon. Will it be correct or not correct? It will depend on the countries and so on. But in fact, it's something which is worth extremely interesting and useful for investors. Whether you believe in climate change or not climate change. And that is probably something that has to be worked out very seriously. And I think to the International Chamber of Commerce, Philippe, this is, in my view, something which is extremely interesting. Thank you, Gilles. And very, very concrete, by the way, very concrete. Good. Now, we have 10 minutes for Q&A. Who wants to raise questions to these excellent speakers? Please. Don't hesitate. Philippe Jorgensen. Philippe, you have a question, I'm sure. No?
I have a question for our Chinese friend, the recent speaker. The price of carbon on the Chinese market is still very low nowadays. What are the prospects of it getting to a higher and more enticing level?
Yeah, thanks for your question. Now the price is about I think $15 US. I mean, it increased within the past 3 years, doubled I think generally. But I mean, still, well, you can see very low compared with the price, yeah, in the EU system. But I mean, as I said, still there are a lot of disagreement among the authorities. I mean, still, I mean, that's first one, what is the absolute price. The second is how you allocate the allowances, right? I think that is also very important. Yeah, thank you. But I mean, I think maybe in the near future we are going the Chinese central government will issue a roadmap for the development of China's national ETS for the next 10 years. Well, I think maybe if you look at that document, maybe the roadmap for the next 10 years will be much clearer. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, please don't be too shy. Who wants to raise a question? No question? No question. Okay, we go to the third part. Complementing COP21 towards the strengthening of the global approach to the fight against global warming. And the first speaker is France Najmi.
Thank you very much. Due to time constraints, I will not present my PowerPoint, but you can get it. I have sent it to the task force members. What we have already said, the world is not on track to achieve the Paris goals. As the International Energy Agency has shown, most of the green investments are taking place in China, the US, and Europe. Hardly anything in the emerging countries. The problem is that we have a disconnect between these three powers. In China, most of investment is in industrial policy to heavily subsidize green industries, which was a problem, for example, for the once dominant European solar industry. 10 years ago, Europe dominated solar, now it's China. And China helped a lot with bringing prices down, which helps the green transition. In the USA, we had the Inflation Reduction Act, which will probably be destroyed by Trump. The EU has, I would argue, has the most effective climate policy by carbon pricing of emissions, trading system, plus carbon border adjustment mechanism, CBAM. The problem also is that China has a huge capacity in green goods, electric vehicles, solar panels, batteries, and others, which could lead to trade wars. We have different policies in these three blocks, whereas China, US subsidize green industries, EU has carbon pricing. But what could the blocks do to help the transition in developing and emerging countries? They could try to further their exports of green goods. Here, China has been very successful. According to European Investment Bank calculation, exports of green goods from 2017 to 2023. In the EU, they rose from under 200 billion euro to over 300 billion euro, growth of 65%. In the US, from a little over 100 billion euro to a little over 50 billion euro, growth of 22%. And China from 200 billion euro to over 350 billion euros, growth of 79%. To achieve our climate goals, we need to help and advance the green transition in emerging and developing countries. As we heard before, it will be difficult to finance this because what was agreed in Baku, as a former speaker said, it's not in the real world. We will not get this money. And the emerging and developing countries do not have a financing capacity to invest in the green transition. China, EU, UK could finance a global Marshall Plan and the green exports to these countries. This would be easier politically to sell than subsidies. China, EU, UK need new growth drivers, and these new growth drivers could be the green industries. We could invite other countries like Japan, US states, Canada, Australia, invited to join with initiatives. Some first ideas how this financing could be done at EU level. First, use existing national EU export financing schemes. Second, an EU climate fund of 100 billion euros based on the Austrian ASFINAG model. EU and EU member states guarantee state guarantees for cheap financing. And as the big new thing, we could use also central bank financing. We did this during the COVID crisis when the Euro system had the long-term refinancing operations during the COVID crisis. It could be used when the inflation is below 2%. We could have a new long-term green refinancing operation to provide funding of up to 100 billion euro at zero interest rates. In the UK, China, there would be a different financing. And then who should be financed? Priority should be for clean electricity production, replacing fossil fuels, especially coal by solar and wind. In the EU, close cooperation with the European Investment Bank and in existing EU schemes, e.g. Global Gateway. For the EU, very important also Ukraine, solar and wind capacity for electricity production. Russia has destroyed most fossil fuel plants, would enable a transition to clean technologies in Ukraine. Second, Euro-Mediterranean energy cooperation, win-win for EU and Mediterranean countries. Replace inefficient electricity production in the countries from gas and oil with more efficient gas or wind and solar plants. Saved oil and gas is exported to the EU and pays back the investment in a short time span. In the future, hydrogen exports from the region, especially North Africa, using existing gas networks. And emerging and developing countries which introduce carbon pricing. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for these observations, Franz. Very interesting. Now I give the floor to William Ledet. William is actually working at the French Treasury. He's the deputy head of climate at the French Treasury. But I can say that today, William, you are only for OECD. Okay, William, you have the floor. No, we do not hear you. We did not hear you.
Working now?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Sorry for that. I'll just present some few slides with me. Oops. So yeah, thanks a lot for inviting me to this discussion, and yeah, very happy to contribute on this very important discussion. And yeah, I just joined the OECD, but I will just be speaking on a personal capacity. Can you just let me know if you can see the slides?
Yeah,
Not sure if it's working well. Okay, perfect. So yeah, I hope I can bring you some little hope after all those discussions by talking a bit about recent developments in carbon pricing and border carbon adjustments around the world. So as you may know, carbon pricing has been developing quite fastly in the recent years, especially in South America, in Asia, in Central America as well. So now a bit more than 25% of global emissions are covered by carbon pricing, and carbon pricing is set to increase to almost a third of global emissions within the next few years. Just also to let you know that in 2023, revenues generated by carbon pricing has exceeded $100 billion for the first time, which is an important milestone for carbon pricing globally. Of course, the coverage of carbon pricing in terms of the level of the carbon pricing is very different, and it has recently suffered from the energy price crisis. So here I just present an interesting metrics from the OECD, which is the net effective carbon trades, which take into account the level of carbon tax, of the ETS price, but also fuel excise tax, minus any fossil fuel subsidy that can decrease the effective carbon price that is paid in the end. And so, as you can see, between 2021 and 2023, there was a small increase in explicit carbon prices, but there was also a huge decrease in energy prices, fueled especially by an increase in fossil fuel subsidy. So that's why the effective carbon prices and the net effective carbon rates have kind of decreased quite substantially. Of course, the situation varies quite a lot globally, with major economies implementing very different of net effective carbon rates. So here on the graph at the bottom of the page, I just show you the different net effective carbon rates for the industry sector, which is an important sector when we talk about carbon leakage, of course. And as you can see, there is a wide difference between major economies. So this can, of course, explain why there is a risk of carbon leakage, which is a situation where, because of the increase of the climate ambition and climate policy stringency in one jurisdiction, there is a reallocation of emissions in the rest of the world due to relocation of companies, also changes in market shares. So this risk is now a reality, and we have many studies showing that there are already high rates of carbon leakage, especially in the EU, because it implements one of the most stringent carbon pricing policy. So far, this risk has been limited to what we call emission-intensive and trade-exposed sectors. So mostly industry and manufacturing sectors, so iron and steel, cement, aluminium, chemicals, paper, glass, fertilizers, etc. But the risk is likely to intensify in the future with increasing carbon pricings. And that explains why border carbon adjustment, BCAs, are having a growing global interest, because it's, of course, an effective policy to tackle carbon leakage. Of course, this depends on the specific design of the policy. So at the bottom of the slide, I just show what would be the change in emissions in the EU and the rest of the world in scenarios with and without CBAM. Without CBAM, you can see that emissions increase in the rest of the world, leading to carbon leakage rate around 20%. With CBAM, then the narrative is very different, because emissions are reduced also in the rest of the world, even leading to what we call negative carbon leakage, meaning that emissions are also reduced in third countries. So now in terms of developments on the implementation of PCAs, as you know, the EU and also the UK will soon have fully operational CBAMs. So the EU has launched its CBAM in October 2023. It's still in a transitional period, and the EU CBAM will phase in from 2026 onwards. And the UK has also recently announced that it will implement its own CBAM by 2027, and they both share very similar characteristics in terms of sectoral scope, except that the UK CBAM will not cover electricity imports. Also in terms of emission scopes and in other modalities, such as they will both take into account the carbon price that is already paid abroad. But what's very interesting is also to see that discussions on BCAs also going in other jurisdictions, especially Australia, Taiwan, Canada, Turkey, US, with 4 to 5 different bills that were proposed in the Congress, and also Chile. So this shows a growing interest for having a mechanism that can help to tackle carbon leakage and also enable jurisdictions to implement stringent climate policies. So I just here summarized what are the main factors that could explain the role of the ETS and CBAM in diffusing carbon pricing globally. So first of all, there can be what we call an emulation effect, where the US acting as a first mover can encourage other jurisdictions to follow by raising their own ambition. This is also helped by international discussions and international fora, such as the COPs, the UNFCCC processes, and also more sectoral initiatives. Also, peer learning as an important impact, because the experience of the EU in successfully implementing an ETS, meaning that emissions were reduced efficiently without having, at least so far, economic impacts, except this risk of carbon leakage. So this can encourage other countries to implement this mechanism. Of course, then jurisdictions are also encouraged to implement carbon pricing and their own BCAs as a way to respond to the carbon leakage risk that they also may face. And last but not least, jurisdictions can also implement carbon pricing and other types of policies, which are similar to the EU's one, to ensure that they have an access to the EU markets, especially when we talk about the development of green markets, but also to preserve the competitiveness in the long term, because the growing demand for low carbon goods will develop in the near future. So yeah, there are many studies talking about all that issues. I just put here some one of them, some main studies, but happy to discuss. Thank you very much.
Thank you, William. Are there econometric simulation of the impact of the European CBAM out abroad, even in the European Union, but abroad, mainly on the carbon emissions abroad? Do you have? I assume that there has been simulations, no? Econometric.
So there are example studies, both studying the impact on economic variables. So, for example, on value added within the EU or within third countries at a sectoral level, but also on global emissions, so EU and non-EU emissions. The OECD just recently published a study about that in March, showing that the effect of the CBAM will be quite limited for the sectors that are covered, but the impact could be, could be channeled down the value chain, and the CBAM is supposed to impact more downstream industries that are using goods that face carbon pricing or the CBAM as inputs. Yeah, so there is also the issue of how far you can go down the value chain to implement carbon pricing policies. But yeah, this is a field that is very much studied.
Yeah, that is a good introduction to what I'm going to say, because I will invite you to enter into economic theory, because it is about this is an economic issue, and we have to go back to the fundamentals of economics. But just to answer, to go further about your answer, I think that CBAM is probably more adapted to big firms that emit a lot of carbon. Otherwise, it might become a very bureaucratic thing, and with decreasing impact for the smallest firms. So that I have not any econometric analysis to say that, but it is easy to understand why. Okay, so my dear colleagues, let me be blunt. No more time to lose by hiding the facts. The source of climate change lies in a major flow of our economies, which do not spontaneously cancel GHG and carbon emissions. Answer to climate change has to be found in the functioning of our economies. Those who place their hopes in policies in energy savings will be disappointed, because most of the increase in the demand for energy already comes, and it will be much more in the future from emerging countries. At this juncture, we have to change our strategy at the global level to phase out carbon and to dramatically increase its speed all around the world. This is a sine qua non if we want to avoid a major economic, social, and political collapse in 1 or 2 generations. Put in economic terms, the problem is dramatically simple. There are only 2 ways to drastically reduce carbon emissions. The first one, promoted by those who believe in degrowth theory, could certainly have a significant impact on the demand of energy, and therefore on emissions of carbon, as we saw, for example, during the COVID-19 period, and we'll probably see with the crisis coming today. But the political and social outcomes of such Malthusian policies are absolutely unacceptable. The other solution is the only one which can bring significant results in due time at a cost which is bearable if it is well implemented. It is based on one of the most common economic principles, which is also one of the most powerful, at least when we give it time to be fully effective, what the economists call the substitution effect. Its mechanism is simple, and it applies to all industries and all industrial sectors of the economy which emit carbon. Let us take the energy sector, ranking first in carbon emissions. Fossil fuels are used to produce electricity, but electricity can be produced as well from renewables or nuclear. The choice depends, among other factors, on the relative cost of production. If there is a price of carbon which is high enough and which remains high enough over time, then it is obvious that producers of electricity will shift from sources of energy that emit most carbon, such as coal, to renewables or nuclear. In the decision to invest in carbon-free production of energy, a major parameter is that it is more profitable to do so. This is a principle among other factors on which the energy transition rests. The implementation of this policy to be fully efficient and succeed in decarbonization needs to abide by some elementary economic principles. First, this policy must be focused on firms, mainly those in the energy sector, and not households. This does not mean that the substitution effect does not apply out for households. But while the social impact can be negative, look at the yellow vest effect, the phase out of carbon by reduction of the household demand of fossil fuel energy can take a long time and necessitate significant amounts of subsidies. And it is not true that it will alone fully destroy the source of carbon emissions by the firms concerned. The simple rule is to address the problem to the firms themselves. The second principle is that it is preferable to price carbon through a market of emission permits than through taxes. The reason lies in the fact that taxes are usually used by governments for satisfaction of other social needs, while one can hope that receipts coming from ETS can be used exclusively for their raison d'etre, which is decarbonization. The third principle is that there is a proposal, and that is important because I know that there are many people that think that, and I think that it is a mistake. There is a proposal to enlarge the principle of carbon pricing to the taxing of goods whose production indirectly leads to carbon emissions. But it would not be very efficient to put a tax on the production of steel under the pretext that it emits carbon. Impact would be first on the cost of steel and therefore on competitiveness, while impact on carbon emission would be much less pronounced than pricing carbon emission by carbon emission by production of steel. In fact, it's better to put a price on carbon emit by the product by production of steel than a tax on steel. It is obviously the volume of carbon emitted by these companies which has to be targeted through ETS and not the volume of production of steel. To strengthen and accelerate this distribution effect, this is the four principle, at least part of the receipts should go to the firms ready to substitute their investment in fossil fuel energy with clean energy, renewables or nuclear. The mechanism should be discussed with the sector itself. It could be a very strong incentive to the energy transition. There are many companies, oil and gas companies that invest in renewables, for example. They have to be incentivized to do that. The fifth principle, to be fully efficient, the mechanism has to be completed with a device which avoids firms submitted to carbon pricing to transfer their activities to a country where there is no carbon pricing. And we arrive to the so-called carbon CBAM to avoid carbon leakage, carbon border adjustment mechanism, which leads products entering the European Union which have been produced with carbon emission to pay so-called carbon adjustment on the borders. Naturally, this virtuous mechanism permits other countries to avoid paying this carbon adjustment if they implement the same carbon pricing system. CBAM is therefore a strong incentive for globalization of carbon pricing. Ideally, we can think of a global price of carbon. It's interesting to observe that 3 leaders of international institutions, the IMF, the WTO, and the European Commission have been pledging together recently for global carbon pricing. But we could start with a price of carbon which remain which is out of the market. With carbon pricing globally, we are at the heart of the solution to decarbonization of the planet, and therefore to successful fight against global warming. It is therefore very important to see in more detail the consequence of a generalization of carbon pricing in the world. First, on trade. There has been interesting study from economists, most of them from the University of Zurich, under the title Greening Ricardo. They have applied the famous theory of comparative advantages to the impact of global price on international trade. And they assume a global price of carbon of $100 per ton, and they observe 3 effects. What they call a scale effect, I should call it an income effect, which corresponds to the impact negative on global production, which is rather low according to them. I'm not sure even that there would be a negative effect. The second effect they call the shift in economic activity towards a greener sector, greener industry, which I call, in fact, it's a geographical and sectoral substitution effect. And the third effect, which they call green sourcing effect, is also a long-term substitution effect. And they arrived to this conclusion after having made some econometric analysis. Altogether, these effects, with a global price of carbon of $100 a ton of carbon, they arrived to the conclusion that these effects globally have a very positive impact on international trade. Very positive impact on international trade. That is very interesting, despite, and very easy to understand. Last remark, carbon pricing, when applied at a significant level of $100 per ton, can bring significant resources, which must be used, in my view, to 3 objectives. The first one is helping emerging countries. Without such a device, will be the major source of increase of carbon emissions. And this fund would help to them to finance their investments in clean energy, renewables or nuclear. It's absolutely key. And this is justice, because most of the carbon of the atmosphere is a consequence of activities of the richest countries of the world. Second observation, this carbon pricing receipts must be used whenever it is very difficult to phase out carbon. In that case, techniques like CCS must become profitable. And it is imperative to help the countries that are equipped with coal-fired plants to build CCS. So I think that these receipts could help very much to reduce or reduce sensibly the amount of emissions, which is important, by the way, in the world. And third, it is imperative to make a significant fiscal incentive for firms, mostly in fossil fuels, when they dedicate a significant amount of their investment in clean energy. To conclude, in an optimistic sentence and less optimistic, by using the substitution effect intelligently, we can reverse the trend of climate change and even create the condition for sustainable economic growth. But that should need, obviously, a global agreement. It could be a complement to the COP21. But there is a big but. The political conditions must be favorable, and that leads us to the core of the event of today, where we see that there are major political obstacles to an efficient fight against global warming. Thank you for listening to me. Now, if you have questions, you have the floor. I think Graziella wants to speak.
Yeah, if you want to go first, Philippe, dis-moi.
No, please, go ahead.
Okay, thank you.
Ladies first.
I wanted to, first of all, thank everybody here. I am very impressed for the work done, and I think the clarity of the thinking as well, which is critical. And it is impressive that human beings have organized around the pricing of such a danger as a way to share an agreement and work together. There are three things that are missing. The first one is we need compulsory carbon dioxide removal markets, compulsory. As the Kyoto Protocol was compulsory, the countries have to vote. It has to be voluntary, but compulsory. So voluntary in the sense that the countries have to vote, but compulsory that once the countries vote, it is not a choice. And it's not voluntary in any other way. This is very important because everybody agrees, particularly Edmond, that we need more carbon to be regulated and to be therefore decreased through the use of carbon pricings. That's what Edmond is telling us. But the data shows that compulsory carbon trading is 20 times in terms of size more effective in removing CO2 than voluntary. And what this means is that the Paris Agreement is not doing us a favor. I understand that the Paris Agreement is important and is valuable as a show of unity, but we need compulsory, mandatory markets. And that's the first point. And if we do that, the data shows we can expect over 20% more increase in the carbon that is removed. This requires more detail to explain, but that is the fact, what I just said. So that's one thing. How are we going, therefore, to obtain that? That's the first thing that we must tackle, to transform a lot of this voluntary trading into compulsory, into legally committed trading, property rights, just the way the Kyoto Protocol did, but now in a different environment. That's number one. If we do that, the data shows that the quantity of CO2 that will be removed is at least 20 times in terms of gigatons larger than what it is now. And that is what we desperately need. The first policy to advocate is to increase the removal of CO2, of course. It's not me, this is the IPCC. And I deliberately use the word removal, although it requires definition, but the European Union emission trading system has provided the definition that we need. We just have to use it. That's first point. The second point is that we are leaving outside very important countries that are suffering from the situation big time, but they are critical to improve it as well. And those are the Middle Eastern countries, the oil countries, etc. We have to find a way to integrate the oil nations and, for example, to make sure that the European Union emission trading system somehow joins forces with the US, with the EUE. In other words, the oil countries must join with the European Union and with the European Union emission trading system, and whatever is adopted now or later in terms of CBAM. So that's the second point. If we achieve those 2 points, there is a great hope that the market forces and the removal that they embody will carry us to a solution. Although, as usual, the question is how soon, because time is of the essence. But those are the two things. We are leaving out the United Arab Emirates, for example, who is a leading actor in all this, because in 15, 20 years, their whole nation may be uninhabitable at 130 degree Fahrenheit. And this is not possible. So how to do that is a major undertaking. And everybody here is with the European Union. So am I, by the way. And it should be. The European Union is the hero of this story. There is no question about it. But we need the Middle Eastern countries, we need the oil countries, we need to expand to the Middle East and to forge those connections. And we need to do it now. So those are the two things I wanted to say. And if we do those two things, I think the carbon removal market that I have been advocating, which is clear from its name what it means, but I'm totally happy to answer any questions, will carry the day and will lead to the market prices that Edmond has been advocated for decades. And me too, but you know, Edmond is the hero here. Thank you, Edmond. And we will lead to the international agreements that we need in order to forge a solution like we did with Kyoto many years ago. But those are the two things that we need. If you have any questions, particularly criticism, I would like to hear it. But I wanted to thank everybody here because everybody in one of these boxes, and even those that are not in the boxes I can see, are heroes. And I can't thank you enough if we're going to have a human species to deal with, okay? Which is, I think, the dream that we all sponsor. So let me know if you have any comments to that, because depending on the comments, the policies can be achieved, but we need to have the purposes clear. If we insist on the voluntary nature of the Paris Agreement, which is a tour de force, but voluntary markets are not going to work. So if we have to understand that and incorporate all that power into the compulsory markets like the Kyoto Protocol was, and what has to succeed now. But now, as we know, no longer to restrict ourselves to emissions, but rather to embrace, focus, and legislate and do policy around removals. That's why I advocate a compulsory carbon removal market, which doesn't exist, and it should exist globally. And we should incorporate not just the European Union, who are the heroes of this story, because they carry the world. We need to include the Middle East and the oil countries. And if we don't do that, the leak will be too large. What to do about the United States is more complicated, of course, but it's embodied in what I just said before. They will see the picture. But this is for another presentation. And at this point, all I want to say is thank you, Edmond, for your I want to say your work without fatigue to make it all happen. And thanks to each of you for that too.
Thank you, Graciela, for your compliments. Fatigue, that's another issue. Yeah, you raise a good question. You see, when you actually, we are facing probably the major, it's not probably, we are facing the major challenge and therefore the major crisis of mankind ever.
What I missed the word.
The major challenge, and if not, and by the way, major crisis.
The major crisis.
Major crisis, major challenge of mankind ever, of mankind.
Yes,
that's
absolutely.
The problem is that when you look in geopolitical terms, the major global reforms that have been implemented.
It has to be global.
The global reforms, I mean global reforms. It came after world wars. The First World War, it was a little bit timid, but there has been some reforms. In after the Second World War, Bretton Woods and so on. So there has been reforms and the implementation of the trade order and so on, and the monetary order, by the way. Now the problem is that these wars have been shocks. There have been winners and losers, and there were opportunities, even between the US and the Soviet Union and so on. There were opportunities to sit around the table and to say, okay, never again, we will try to sort out something serious. But there was something very strong that happened, which were global wars, world wars. Now we are facing a crisis which is very different, because the crisis, look, in Paris today, the weather is absolutely superb, beautiful. You go outside, you cannot imagine how enjoyable it is. So the people say, okay, climate change, okay, but they will see probably in three months' time that it is not that beautiful. But it is changing, and it's slow, and it will last. And this is extremely difficult. As a former politician, I'll tell you that you need strength and will, which is something which is very rare, and the willingness to fight when you try to deal with an issue like that. which is very bad, but it takes a long time, a lot of energy, a lot of compromise, a lot of, and there are so many other problems that become first in the eyes of the people, that it makes things more difficult. This is the problem. And you see it today. What Trump is doing is a disaster. But what can we do for climate change? I don't speak of the rest, even though the rest is not that brilliant, but anyhow, let us speak just of climate change. It is a disaster what he's doing. That is really clear. And the Americans realize that, by the way, now. But you have to take it like that. You have to take, and so obviously it's rather easy to build some kind of framework around carbon pricing, because it is carbon pricing that must be at the heart, and through substitution effects, which is the basic of the movement in economies. You can build something, which I did in a very simple way. It's rather easy, but you need people, politicians, that try to bring together all the countries in order to build something which is solid, which makes sense. The CBAM, in this sense, is something very, very useful, because it leads other countries to go in the right direction. And I have appreciated very much, I think Adair is no more with us, what Adair says. It is the strength that with China and the European Union and the UK, obviously, we could be, if together we were trying to make a roadmap through carbon pricing. China is doing a tremendous endeavors in renewables. They are first in the world. Tremendous endeavors in general. In the fight against global warming, China is doing very much, and we appreciate that. I think that the EU is doing also a lot of things, and I think that if we could build something together and bring other countries around market forces, not subsidies, not taxes. I don't like that. I think that I think let market forces work through ETS. I think that we would probably it's the only entry I see to go in the direction you suggest, Graciela. Who wants to speak, please? Jacques, you want to speak? Jacques, we don't listen you. You want to speak? Who wants to speak? Gilles? No? No comments? William? I realize that it's very complicated to speak of these kind of issues which have a geopolitical dimension and political dimension, by the way. But unfortunately, if you don't introduce this dimension, you go nowhere. It is the type of issues that which needs politicians. The problem is that the politicians are, in general, interested by the short term, because what is interesting for them is to be re-elected. But there are many more politicians than you can believe that are also interested in the public good in the long run. Many more than we think. You have to convince them. You have to lead them to read some things, to look at the issues, and you can build something. Okay, is there someone who wants to speak? France? No?
No, thank
maybe
you.
I can.
I think if you would make a political comment, we need the emerging and developing countries on board. Politically, it would be very difficult to provide them with subsidies, but it would be politically much easier to finance our exports of green industries to these countries.
Yeah, that's agree. Yeah. Who wants to speak? Okay. If no one wants to speak, I will thank you, all of you. It was an excellent exchange of views, which proves that there are a lot of ideas, that you are really motivated to discuss. That we don't, for the time being, we don't have the solution, because we are not alone. But we have to go ahead with our friends from China. We have to, from the US, by the way, because in the US there are many people that don't share the approach of Trump, at least on climate change. And hope, you see, sometimes it happens, events which we didn't expect, which allow to go in the right direction. That's very frequent. So I think that we should not despair. For the time being, it's difficult. But look, even in the US, we all know that the US is a federal state, and there are obviously states which are not at all sharing the position of Trump, and which they even have the price of carbon. So, in California, for example. So, okay, thank you very much. It was very useful, and I learned a lot. Thank you for your contribution, and we will inform you about the next event of the task force, and we will go ahead with our Chinese friends and our American friends in order to open the debate globally. Thank you.
Is it possible that we receive the presentations which were presented here, and also some background papers for brilliant ideas which were presented here from Graciela or some others before? It would be great that we can read this in detail.
Okay, yes. Very good. Is it possible, Joël?
Oui, Christophe, je peux le faire.
Okay. Myself, I think you will get it. I will ask those who have written something. You will have mine. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, all of you, and good luck.
Thanks a lot. Bye.